All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's class on angels and demons. Now, just before we start the class, I'm going to share a poll with everybody. If you don't mind answering it, it's just one question regarding your belief in the topic. There's no judgments here, just out of interest. To see, I'll leave the poll up for about 20 seconds. If you don't mind, it's interesting to see the numbers. I can get to know the audience a little bit better. Okay, the results are in. And 69% of people do believe, 8% do not, 22% are undecided. Now, I'm not here tonight to convince anybody one way or the other. Here tonight to share some fascinating ideas and information. Tonight is part one. Tonight is going to be more fact versus fiction based on our tradition, as well as nice, interesting information. Next week will be a lot more practical. Now, I'm just going to share my screen with you guys. And here we go. Beautiful PowerPoint that my wife prepared for us tonight in order to help us guide us through all the steps and stages. So I get a call from a girl this past week, and she tells me she's dating a demon. She wants to know what my thoughts are. I told her it's really not a good idea. They tend to be very possessive. You see, part of why I chose this topic is when it comes to the idea of angels, demons, magic, supernatural, there tends to be a lot of misinformation and misconceptions when it comes to the concept, either based on Hollywood or based on a lot of Christian influence and other sources. And because of this, I felt it's a pretty important topic maybe to tackle from a Jewish perspective, especially for those who value the teachings of the Torah and the truth of the Torah. When I was a couple of years ago, I was watching a cartoon, and there was a scene there where a father and his son are walking by a magnificent building with gargoyles at the top, and he turns to his son, he says, "Son, those are gargoyles, some kind of creatures from back when religion knew how to scare people. Nowadays, they use other tactics." Is that really what it's all about? And let's explore this. See, the question is there really anything out there? Is there really anything beyond what the eye sees? Is there something there with us? Is there something there around us? So I'd like to take a few different approaches to this. We're going to start with a very logical approach. And that is, start with a story. There was once a Hasidic master traveling with his students. And they were traveling, obviously, by horse and buggy. And it was somewhat of a ride share. There was a Hasidic master with his students, a few cynics, and a wagon driver. The Hasidic master was teaching his students about the concept of angels and a spiritual world beyond what the eye, at least the regular eye, can see, the physical eye can see or perceive. And after going on for about 45 minutes or so, the cynic finally pipes up and he says, "Rabbi, it doesn't exist. I've never seen such a thing. I can't comprehend such a thing. It's not there." And the rabbi turns to the cynic and says as follows. He says, "We're all traveling to the same destination. We're all going to a city called Leipzig, where there's going to be a fair, a business fair there. People will be selling products and different items, you see? But in the world of the horse, the reason why we're traveling is absolutely for the sake of hay. In the world of the wagon driver, the reason why we're traveling is because of the few gold coins we are going to pay for the trip. In your world, you're traveling because you're going to do business. And in my world, I'm traveling because I have a godly mission to accomplish something there. You see, just because the horse is too small-minded to understand money, and the wagon driver is too small-minded to understand larger business, and you're too small-minded to understand God, or at least the concept of God, does that mean each one's reality is not real or true? It depends on the tools that you have to perceive things with. Or it's like the fellow with the fishing net. So one day a fellow in the old town, he decides he wants to figure out how many different types of fish there are in the ocean. He rows his boat out. He drops his net. His net has holes about 5 inches large. Casts his net into the water, leaves it there for a while, pulls the net out of the water after a couple of hours, brings the fish, all the fish that he collects back to land. He goes through each fish, checking out the different types of species there are, and he comes to one conclusion. He says there's not a single fish in the ocean smaller than 5 inches. Cool. All he had was a net that had 5-inch holes. It's about the tools that we use. You see, years ago, people never would have fathomed the concept of Wi-Fi. Even before that, radio waves or electricity. It was a matter of having tools to perceive these things, to catch these things. It wasn't a matter of creating these things. Electricity was always there. We didn't always have the tools to use it, to harness it. Waves were always there. We not necessarily always had the tools of how to harness it, how to catch it. Based on the tools, all of a sudden, we're, so to say, catching these things, which were once upon a time thought of as impossible. Based on this, it's just as logical to say that there is something that exists that the eye can't see, that is beyond us, that is supernatural, as it is logical to say that it doesn't. Because what will push you one way more than the other at this point? Now, the Rambam, Maimonides, points out something very fascinating. When he talks about the different principles of faith, Maimonides counts 13 principles of faith. One of the principles, he says, is believing that there is some spiritual reality out there with angels and different levels of communication between God, angels, and human beings. And that's what he understands prophecy to be. And this is how the Rambam Maimonides explains how there is a transmission from God to the human being, the Torah, the concept that the Torah came directly from God through communication. And that there must be this system of communication. And that is a spiritual system of angels and the like. Now, why does there have to be this spiritual system out there? Very simply put, the purpose of the spiritual system, imagine you take your hair dryer, your phone charger, and you plug it into the reactor at the power plant. What do you think is going to happen? It's going to explode the entire thing. There's too many watts. There's too much electricity, too much power for your little tool or item or appliance that you're trying to plug in. You need to have proper wattage. You need to have proper wiring and transformers that mitigate the power of the electricity so that your appliance can handle it. And the same thing is, we're God to communicate directly. We're God to directly run things. It would be too much of an overload for us human beings to be able to handle it. And therefore, as Maimonides explains, there must be this spiritual system that allows godliness, spirituality, and truth and energy to be transmitted into our world. Otherwise, poof, nothing is left. Now, these are just a few logical points that are brought up on the concept. Now let's move a little bit to tradition. So before we start discussing tradition, I'm just going to a little bit of an outline of what it is exactly we will be discussing. We have what is known as shadim, which is the Hebrew word for demons. And the term shade, there are many different opinions of where it comes from. It either comes from the term sada, which means a field, which they are known for living in the fields and out of the city, or shade from the term destruction because of their destructive nature. Other places they are referred to as seirim, which means goats. We might get to that a little bit later, but some say the reason why they're called se'irim because the word for hair in Hebrew is sa'ar. And when one sees one, it causes their hairs to stand. Other terms and names that are known for them are ruchis, and as spirits, malachi chabola, angels that bring harm, or mazikin, damagers, and there are several other names besides those, but those are the generally somewhat famous. So we're going to discuss, what are they in the first place? Where do they come from? When were they created? What do they look like? And some famous examples. Let's start off. So based on our tradition, it seems to be that there definitely are demons, angels, and the concept. Because you can comb through the Talmud, comb through even aspects of the way the prophets speak and the Torah itself, as we will be discussing. And the concept of demons does come up many a time. But now, let's start off with a statement from the Maharal of Prague. Rabbi Yehuda Lowy, or Levoi, was the chief rabbi in Prague in the 16th century, and most famous for creating what is known as the Golem. The Golem was a creature created by the Maharal and two of his students. The creation took place out of clay. They went into the forest, formed clay, different cantations, different types of candles, and they walked in 3 people, they walked out 4. Many fascinating ideas told about the Golem, some true, some folklore. In the world of academia, highly questioned. But he is said to be resting in the attic of this shul, which is the shul that stands since the times of the Maharal, otherwise known as the Altanai shul. And he explains as follows. Shadim are a consequence of creation, as opposed to a direct product of creation. Therefore, they remain less connected to the Creator, thus allowing them to unite with others that feel so. And the idea is like this. We know that when God created the world, God said, let there be light. Let there be this. Let there be that. That is the idea of God willing something into creation. But when it came to, there is no let there be demons, let there be shaitim. As we'll see, they come from somewhere else. Now, when were they created? So we have one statement in the Medrash, which is a compilation of teachings from the times of the Mishnah. So we're talking over 2,000 years ago. And over there it tells us how they were created on Friday afternoon, right before Shabbos. So on the 6th day of creation, after Adam and Eve were already created, after Adam and Eve already sinned with the tree of knowledge, right before the Shabbos is coming in, the Medrash tells us that demons were created. In Kabbalistic sources and in the Talmud, it discusses how demons were created. Well, at least one demon existed before at some time on the 6th day, but most demons, or many demons, came about that after the sin of the tree of knowledge, Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava, separated for 130 years. Now, what did Adam do during this time? We are told in the Talmud that Adam had a demonic wife known as Lilith. Many people even shudder and fright at the sound of her name. Many don't even mention her name in whole. And Adam lived with her for 130 years. And they had something like children. But as the Talmud tells us, she gave birth to demonic spirits during this 130 years. Another Talmudic passage tells us that many demons were created, as we read in this week's Torah portion, that one of the punishments of the several generations after the flood, those who decided to build a tower and rebel against God, one of their punishments were to be turned into demons. And that's the general concept. But let's go back to the statement of the Maharal. This idea that Shadim are a consequence of creation. You see, everything that exists was created before Adam and Chava before Adam and Eve. When Adam was created, the entire world was supposed to be set up and fully running so that Adam and Eve would come into a world that was ready and set for them to make their mark on the world. Now, if that's the case, why would anything be created afterwards? So the Talmud tells us a few things actually that were created after Adam and Chava. It wasn't just the demons. The first pair of tongues were created after Adam and Eve, after Adam and Chava, as well as fire. You see, there are two types of creation that came about after Adam and Chava were created. One type of creation was to introduce Adam to certain concepts, to teach him. You see, to make a pair of tongs, you need to have the first pair of tongs to hold the new pair of tongs in the fire. Without tongs, Adam, man, humankind would never have been able to create tongs. So God said, I will fashion a pair of tongs, give them to you, and now you have to fashion your own. And the same thing is with fire. Adam was not going to discover fire on his own. God showed him fire, and from then on, Adam knew how to make fire and how to use fire. If that's the case, what are shadim? So many understand shadim to be a consequence. Demons are a consequence of Adam's actions, of humankind's failures, as well as creatures to test us, as we will explore. But to understand this idea that the Maharal is trying to convey, that they are a consequence, but not a direct product, let's understand this a little bit better. You see, Elikus, or Elikut, roughly translated as godliness. And that is the spirituality, how God communicates with existence and the world. Elikus comes along and creates a world, creates holiness, creates Kedusha, creates that which is pure and holy. But at the same time, we know that this world does not just contain that which is pure and holy. There are other stuff. And where does that come from? That comes from the left side, known as Tuma, impurity. But you see, that is not a direct product of creation. Direct product of creation is holiness, spirituality, and even within physicality, that which is pure and holy, is sometimes even more godly than spirituality itself. But that is pure and holy. However, there is a byproduct of creation, and that is Tuma. That is that which is impure, that which is unholy and evil. You see, one of the examples given to explain this concept is, you have a king, and this king throws a feast for all of his closest friends and families and relatives. And they celebrate, and there's exquisite, amazing food. The dining is just unimaginable. Once the entire party's over, the chef comes out to the king and says, there's lots of leftovers in the kitchen. What do I do with them? The king says, I could care less. Feed the dogs. Obviously, this king wasn't very much a pet owner. And the chef takes the leftover foods and gives it over to the dogs or gives it over to whoever. And the idea is that the necessity to feed these dogs, who worked, so to say, worked for the king, was not a direct consequence, was not a direct product of the king's party. It was a consequence. There happened to be leftovers. There's something to set, and we don't want this food to go to waste, so here, just take it. And that's the idea. When unholy things, unholy, impure, and evil things exist, there are a consequence of it, creation, not a direct product. And that's where demons come from. That's where shadim come from. Now, their makeup, according to our tradition, is something fascinating. You see, in Jewish thought and tradition, we are all, everything that exists, every physical reality that exists in this world is made up of four elements: fire, water, earth, and wind. Now, for a long time, people took this as literal, that everything is made up of literal fire, literal water, literal earth, and wind, but that doesn't have to be. Fire can be energy. Water, as we know that all mass can exist in liquid state or solid state, which is earth, or gas. Another way of understanding this is, there's that which is hot and dry, that which is hot and moist, that which is cold and dry, and that which is cold and moist. And this is the makeup of everything that exists physically in our world, in our reality. Now, the medrash that I spoke about before, how the demons were created on Friday, tells us as follows. God was in the middle of creating demons. He creates their soul, their spirit, their spiritual energy. God starts to form their body together. And the form is going to be out of these four ingredients. Because like I said before, everything that exists in our world is made up of these four ingredients: energy, liquid, solid, and gas. It's a matter of what are the proper proportions. And it depends on the item. Certain things have more earths, more solid. Certain things are made out of more gas or energy. God knows what he's doing in the kitchen. And God brings the fire, brings the wind, and right then Shabbos starts. So God stops what he's doing to teach us a very valuable lesson. You might be doing something very important, but when Shabbos comes, you stop. But what ends up happening is demons are left with an unfinished body made out of only fire and wind, energy and gas. And this will help us understand a lot of their nature, as we will see. So let's discuss. What do they look like? What are they made up of? What are their characteristics? So the Talmud tells us something fascinating. In three ways, demons are like angels. What is that? They have wings. They can fly. And they have insight into the future. Now, I just want to explain. When the Talmud says they have wings, please don't think of it as physical wings. They're black wings or white wings or whatever they might be. No. The commentaries, mainly Nachmanides right there on the spot, explain something fascinating. He says wings is the fact that they're not bound by physicality. You see, the reason why physicality defines us and we're constricted by it is because we're a composition of the four elements we just discussed before. And a big part of our composition is earth and water, which are very heavy, have a tendency to be extremely heavy. Versus when it comes to demons, they have wings represents the fact that they can go between the physical and the spiritual very easy. They're not defined by it. And that's what it means that they can fly. But you think they can flap their wings and they fly up and down like a bird. They go south during the winter and they go north in the summer. That's not what's happening. The idea of flying means to be able to go back from one reality to another reality of spirituality to physicality, not being defined by time and space, at least not physical time and space, because they are defined by a spiritual time and space, as we might discuss later. And the idea that they have an insight into the future. This is going to be more relevant to the next week's class, but just a little bit of an idea here is demons do not know the future, but they have an insight into the future. That means because they have access to more spiritual realms than we do, so they have access to behind the scenes. So they hear what is going on behind the scenes, what the angels are saying, what the heavenly court is ruling, and what God sometimes is planning. So they hear it a moment before us, an hour before us, a day before us. Imagine you get some insight of certain plans before somebody else does. So you know what's going to transpire. But over here, they're getting insight not into just what another human being is saying, but they get insight into the inner workings, the behind the scenes of what's going to happen in this world. And therefore, they have an insight to the future, but not that they have an inherent knowledge of the future. But it's whatever is revealed to them and made available to them at the time. Then the Talmud continues and tells us, in three areas they are like humans. They eat and they drink. Now, does that mean that they eat physically and drink physically? No. They eat very different than we do, and they drink very different than we do. One is it's a spiritual sustenance. And second, there might be something physical about that, but that idea will be expounded upon more next week. The second and third idea is that they reproduce. They have children. There are male demons, there are female demons, otherwise known as Shedim and Shidos. They have children. Obviously not physical children, the way we do. And they also die. They are mortals. They live and they die. just like human beings and anything physical deteriorates, so too their physical makeup, which like we said is made out of fire and wind, gas and energy, can also deteriorate, and that equals death for a demon. What do they look like? So right here we have a fine little looking baby demon. They all start off nice and cute. Now, so the Talmud tells us different aspects. I'm not sure where most of the details in that picture are actually off. But anyways, it wasn't claimed to be correct. So there's a passage in Talmud which tells us if you want to see demons, it gives you a whole formula of what to do in order to see them. And one of the results is you spread certain types of ashes of different types of animals, several generations of firstborn. Anyways, you spread the ashes on the floor. It says you wake up in the morning and you will find bird foot imprints in it. That is footprints of the demon. They have bird-like feet. Another characteristic the Talmud gives them is cow hooves. Probably different types of demons. Some have cow hooves, some have bird-like feet. Famously, they have split tongues. And many say that there's some tradition that there are certain types of demons that are goat-like and very, very dark colored. Now, these are the general ideas given in the Talmud. Whether they are all going to be interpreted literally and physically or not is up to interpretation. Obviously, there are different commentaries that take it in different ways. Take it how you want it in the sense for now. And as the Talmud continues, in truth, a demon can take on any physical form. It can look like anything. They can look like a person, like a plant, like a tree, or even like a rock. There are different stories in the Talmud, which we'll be discussing momentarily. The Talmud in Tractate Brachos tells us something fascinating. Abba Binyamin says, if the eye had the power to see them, no creature can endure the demons. And that's because they are everywhere. The point that the Talmud, we know there's a famous verse in Psalm 90, Aleph Uruvava Mimenecha, that there are tens of thousands on your left and hundreds of thousands on your right. That refers to demons. However, Eilecha lo yigash, they will not touch you, because the Talmud tells us elsewhere that one person alone, a demon can appear to them. Two people, the demon can appear but can't harm, and three people, the demon can't even appear. But that's the exclusion of the demon. If the demon is in its home ground, if it's in its own habitat, its natural habitat, which we'll discuss in a moment what that means, as the Talmud here tells us, in a place like a ridge or a field, a place that's generally unpopulated. And the Gemara goes on to tell us something fascinating, that when it comes to the crushing crowd during the lectures, and even if it's crushing, but there aren't that many people there, the reason why it feels so crowded is because in truth, the demons are there, and that's why you're feeling the crowding. When it comes to the weakness in the knees, that comes from them. And the wearing out of a scholar's garments is because the demons are constantly rubbing around them. There are many different interpretations to this Gemara, some literal, and some just say it's the idea of different things that enforces, that hold us back from doing what we want. What holds us back from going to join a Torah class? And that is, it can be the crushing of the crowd and say, it's not for me. I don't like the people there. I'm too lazy to go. That's the weakness of the knees, the laziness that we get from wanting to do what's right. Or the wearing out of the clothing is, we know doing what's right sometimes costs a little bit. But nevertheless, we still push ourselves to try to do what's right, or some don't. There's a laziness because of cost or whatever it's going to be. And these are different ideas that the Gemara might be intimating over here. Now, because of this, the Talmud actually records in many different places, many different customs in different communities that people have that different communities have adopted because of demons. So, for example, it says that in Talmudic times, in Babylonia, modern day Iraq, people wouldn't drink in pairs. In other words, either have 1 cup or 3 cups, not 2 cups. There are many different fascinating insights into why. One idea is not having food or drink under a bed. One idea is different ways of washing the hands because of demons and evil spirits. One is people have a custom of spilling water before taking a drink from it, different foods left out overnight, and many, many more customs around the concept of saving oneself from demons or demonic possession. Now, what is the main role of a demon? What's their main function? And to put it in simple terms, to wreak havoc, cause mayhem. They destroy. They rebel against everything good. If there's anything that exists that is good, their reaction is to rebel. Now, we're going to take this part to discussing a few personalities. And in truth, before we get to that, you have to understand something very important, that demons don't have free will. The Maharal of Prague, who we've mentioned before, mentioned something fascinating. It says demons only have free will within the boundaries that they're allowed into. Then they have free will whether to destroy or not to destroy, wreak havoc or not to wreak havoc. But in areas where they have not been given any permission, by God, obviously, there is nothing that they can do. Now, let's go through some personalities, some famous characters amongst them. One of them, as we mentioned before, known as Lilith. She was Adam Rishon's temporary wife for 130 years, very short time. You think about it, he lived for 930. She is known as the seductress. She is the demon of sexuality. She is known to be a baby snatcher. You'll see in many Jewish homes, there's a concept of something called a kamea, which is a charm. As you'll see written on there, different Kabbalistic ideas and customs ideas, you'll see her name mentioned there. The idea is to ward her off to protect the young and the vulnerable. Igris bas Machas. So fascinating. Machas was the daughter of Yishmael, Abraham's granddaughter. She marries Esav, and on the side, she has relations with a demon. According to many opinions, she is even more demon than human. And she gives birth to a daughter named Igris. So Igris and Machas, along with Lilith, are known to be the mothers of all demons. Now, Igris is known as a vandal with legions. The Talmud actually records two fascinating stories. One story takes place roughly 1st century, Common Era, with a great sage named Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa. Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, as the story goes, he's traveling one night and he bumps into Igris. This demon, this demonic woman standing there, and she's there with thousands of her soldiers, her foot soldiers, her vandals, her thugs. And then she says to Rabbi Hanina, if it were not for the voice of heaven calling out right now about your greatness, because you're a master of Torah, I would destroy you. So Rabbi Hanina realizes that this is an opportune moment. He says, if I'm so great, then I would like to make a ban against you. You and your people, you and your demons, are no longer welcome to where human beings can be. But he didn't completely ban her. He says, let's make a deal. The nights when people travel, which back in the day, people would travel Sunday night to be in the big city on Monday, and they would travel home on Monday night so that they can go home with all their merchandise. So Tuesday night and Tuesday night they would not travel. Wednesday night, once again, they would travel in order to be in the big city on Thursday. Thursday night, they'd go home. So Friday night and Saturday night and Tuesday night were nights where they did not travel. So he tells her like this, I'm going to decree, you can only be on the roads and in the scattered areas where people tend to pass by once in a while, the way people traveled. You can be there on nights when people don't travel, and that is Tuesday night Friday night and Saturday night. But the rest of the nights, you're banned from any areas where people travel. In other words, stay in your corner, we'll stay in our corner. We're not going to cross paths. You're not going to bother anybody. She had no choice but to accept it. Years later, about the 3rd or 4th century, another sage known as Abaye, he's traveling, and he bumps into the same Igris. And Igris tells him the same thing: if it were not for the heavenly voice that just cried out how powerful you are because of the Torah you learned, I would destroy you. To which he responds and says, if that's the case, I will seize this opportunity and I will ban you even on the nights when people don't travel, that you stay in your own area and people will stay in their own area, and there won't be any crossing paths. Nobody will be harmed from you anymore. Which the Talmud says, but we know of stories of people being harmed after this story. And the Talmud responds, those were one-off cases of a demon mistakenly wandering into places where people are. But otherwise, for the most part, the demons stay in their own corners, people stay in their own corners, and they don't cross paths. Another great character known as Kordikis. Kordikis sounds very Greek, and Kordikis is the name of a particular demon which has to do with drunkenness. This is the demon that after a person imbibes a certain amount of alcohol will start to make the worst decisions of their lives. All thanks to Kordikis. Many people have a lot to take up with Kordikis, unfortunately. Now, where does this idea even come from? It's fascinating. See, we just learned in this week's Torah portion, actually read about 2 fascinating ideas in regards to demons. One is almost explicitly in the Torah, and one is in a Medrash. And it tells us as follows, that when Noah has to bring all the animals onto the teva, onto the ark to save them. So we know that all the non-kosher animals, there were 2, 1 male and 1 female. The kosher animals, there were 7 males and 7 females, that Noah can bring a Thanksgiving offering to God afterwards from the kosher animals. And the Talmud tells us all living creatures on earth must go. The Torah tells us all living creatures on earth must go. And Rashi, the famous French commentary, brings the Talmud that says, including demons. There were demons on the ark, because demons, like we discussed before, have a body. After the flood is over, we read the famous story how Noah plants a vineyard and gets completely drunk. And the Medrash tells us a fascinating story. How Noah's standing there, he's ready to plant the vineyard, but he knows it's going to take a long time for this vineyard to develop and grow and produce its good fruit. So he decides, the Satan, which we're going to learn about momentarily, is strolling along. He sees Noah and he says, you know what? I'll strike you a deal. You want this vineyard to grow quickly? So let me help you out. Noah says, you know what? Sure, if you have some magic mix that's going to help this grow right away, let's do it. So the Medrash tells us Satan takes a sheep, slaughters it, and pours its blood over the seeds. Then he takes a lion, slaughters it, pours its blood, takes a monkey, slaughters it, and pours its blood, and then takes a pig, a swine, slaughters it, pours its blood, and boom, out comes the vine. What's this teaching us? What's going on over here? Funny story, but so many of the commentaries point out what's happening is the Medrash is telling us what happens to people when they drink. The first stage of a little bit of alcohol, a person becomes very mellow, very calm, almost like a sheep. Very lovable, somewhat fluffy of a person, brings out that part of their personality. Then they continue to drink a little bit more, and they become this ferocious lion with all the courage in the world, and they're in everybody's face. But they don't stop there. They continue drinking. They become like a monkey. They start jumping around, acting like a fool. The person who said, Vodka, we got to talk. You told me I could dance, but I saw the videos from last night. And then they don't stop there. They continue to drink, and they end up rolling around in their own filth like a pig. And it says that it was at this point that they Noach and the Satan kind of struck a deal. that a person who's at the first stage or two, like the sheep or the lion, still in their own control. The moment a person drinks past the stage of the lion, they are now in the control of Krudaikis, or the control of the Satan. Drink responsibly. Another story of a famous demon. This demon is known as Ashmedai, the king of the demons. One of the most powerful demons to exist. And there's a fascinating story that the Talmud tells us, which I would love to share with you right now. The Talmud is in Tractate Gittin, page 68. It tells us a fascinating story how King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech, when he wants to build the Holy Temple, he doesn't want to use any metal to cut the stones, because we know metal is created to shorten a person's life. The Holy Temple is created in order to lengthen a person's life, not for war, not for violence. Now, even though really only the altar is not allowed to have any metal involved in creation of the altar, versus the rest of the structure you can, but King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech, did not want to use any metal. So what was he going to do? How was he going to cut solid stone? So the sages told him that there's a particular sea creature called the shamir. And if you take this shamir and you put it on any material except for silk, it will completely slice right through the material, more powerful than any blade you can fashion. So Shlomo HaMelech says, I need this worm, or I need this sea creature, really. And he decides he's going to find it. He asks the rabbis, how can I find it? The rabbis tell him, we don't know. We don't know where it is. Maybe find a demon. And like we said before, the demons are privy to some classified information. Maybe the demons can help you. So he gets on it. He finds two demons, because we know King Solomon knew the language of the animals, the birds, the demons as well. He had an extreme power over spirituality. He brings two demons. He pressures them. And they say, we don't know, but Ashmedai might. So he says, where do I find Ashmedai? So they say, Ashmedai lives in a particular area of the world, far from here. And he has an interesting daily schedule. You see, he has a little well, which he has covered up with his signet covering it, and he makes sure that this seal is never broken. If it's broken, he moves. And he lives there. He uses this to drink water. He lives there, except for every morning he goes up to heaven to study Torah in the heavenly yeshiva. And at night he comes back and he studies in the yeshivas down here. Ashmedai was a Torah scholar, a demon, but a Torah scholar. Now, he says if Ashmedai sees you coming, hears you coming, he will definitely run. Definitely does not like you. He definitely does not like holiness, even though he studied the Torah. So King Solomon calls his captain of his army, his general, Beniyahu. He says, it's your mission. He gives him a chain, a special chain with the name of God engraved in it. And he says, with this chain, you will have power over Ashmedai. You'll be able to control him. And to protect Beniyahu himself, King Solomon gives him a special ring with God's name engraved in it, with several other words, and that this would protect Beniyahu from Ashmedai's power. Beniyahu goes on this long journey, and he takes with him flasks of wine and some cotton balls. When he comes to Ashmedai's lair, he knows Ashmedai right now is gone. He sees the well, he sees the pit. And what he does is he digs a hole further down the mountain from the pit, but under the pit, and he drains it of all the water. Then he stuffs the hole with the cotton. Then he goes a little bit higher in the mountain, digs a hole that goes directly to the pit, and he pours wine. So now the pit is filled with wine, all the holes are clogged, and the seal over the opening is completely intact. He hides and waits. Ashmedai comes back, inspects the seal, that it has not been tampered, sees that it has not been tampered with yet. He opens up to take a drink because he's thirsty. He needs sustenance, be it physical or spiritual, however you'll understand it. He's about to take a drink and he notices the water is now wine. and he thinks it miraculously turned into wine. However, he knows that it is foolish to drink. He says, I don't want to get drunk. No, if I drink this wine, it's going to get me drunk. And the Gemara, Talmud starts quoting the different verses that might be going through his mind that discuss the negativities of being drunk. He says, I will lose my wisdom. I will lose my wit. I will lose my composure. But then Ashmedai is standing there for long enough. He's thirsty enough. And he remembers there's one verse in Psalms that says that wine makes the heart of men and God happy. He says, if that's the case, let me take a sip. And he drinks, and he drinks, and he drinks until he becomes drunk. At this point, his powers are weakened. Benio jumps out with the chain and wraps him up with the chain. At this point, Ashmedai cannot fight against the power of Benio. And he says, you're coming back with me to King Solomon. And on the way back, the Talmud tells us some fascinating details, which I'd like to share with you because it gives us a little bit of an insight into what demons are all about. It says, as they're walking, his shoulder bumps into a palm tree, and the entire fully grown palm tree is uprooted just to bring out the power of the demon. They continue walking, but his other shoulder bumps into a beautiful house built structure with stone, and the whole entire thing comes crumbling down. They continue walking. He's about to brush against a little hut made out of straw, and the widow of this house comes running out and says, please move out of the way. Don't bump into it. You're going to destroy my only thing I have left. To which Ashmedai swerves out of the way, and while twisting, he ends up breaking a bone. To which he says that's what it means, that a soft word can break a strong bone. And he continues going. While they're walking, they see a wedding taking place. And as they see the wedding and people are rejoicing, Ashmedai starts to cry. Then they walk by, and there's a fellow at the cobbler, by the shoemaker, and he's telling the shoemaker, I need a pair of shoes that will last me 7 years. And Ashmedai starts to laugh. They continue walking, and they see a man practicing sorcery. And Ashmedai can't help but laugh. And it goes on. They finally come back to Yerushalayim, to Jerusalem, and brings Ashmedai to Shlomo HaMelech. Long story short, Shlomo HaMelech gets the worm, or the sea creature, and he's able to build the magnificent first holy temple. Just to give a little bit of insight to these interesting details of the story, the idea of Ashmedai knocking over the tree and the house is that the more haughty somebody is, the more pompous and arrogant a person is, or something is, the more likely it is for the demon to want to attack. Because the demon says, you think you have it all, let me show you. But somebody who's truly humble and recognizes that God is in charge, recognizes that I don't have much, but whatever Hashem gives me is like the widow, the demon stays away. Then he continues. When he sees the wedding, why did he laugh? Why did he cry? Because he knew that 3 days later, the groom would die, tragically. When he saw the man by the shoemaker, why did he laugh? Because this man wanted shoes for 7 years. The man didn't realize he didn't have 7 days left. And when he saw the man practicing sorcery, witchcraft, he laughed because this man was trying to improve his life with witchcraft and sorcery. If he would have just dug under his own house, he would have found treasures unimaginable, treasures that would have kept him rich and his children and his grandchildren rich for the rest of their lives. But a fool, he went after sorcery and magic instead of following the laws of the world and realizing that what's most important is what's right here, right now. Now, don't think that Ashmedai was being compassionate towards human beings when he expressed all these motions. He was trying to show how the fragility of human life and how he was well aware of it, and he was not subject to almost all of that. He was just trying to show off his own powers. He was not trying to show compassion in any way, shape, or form. Now, these are all pretty ancient stories, and there are a lot more stories out there, especially in the Talmud and in the Medrash. But let's fast forward. Let's go to the early 1600s. Fascinating story with a fellow named Reb Yoel Baal Shem. Reb Yoel Baal Shem lived in a town called Zamosch. Not really sure how you pronounce it. It's spelled Zamostch. Figure out how to pronounce it. Anyways, he lived in the early 1600s. The reason why his name was Baal Shem, Rabbi Yoel Baal Shem, was because the word Baal Shem means the master of the name. It means that he was able to perform certain miracles with God's name. He was a student of the famous Bach, Rabbi Yoel Sirkis of Krakow. And the story goes as follows. In a town in Poland called Posen, the great-grandfather of the Alter Rebbe, his name was Baruch Batlin. He lived in an apartment on the first floor. He had a neighbor upstairs. His neighbors upstairs were known as Avigdor and Gittel. Avigdor and Gittel, Jewish people, but extremely wicked people. Avigdor was always drunk and playing cards. Avigdor and his wife, Gittel, were always cursing people. We're always talking bad about people. We're always treating people horribly. And they just lived a horrible life. One day, Avigdor and Gittel die. They pass on, leaving no children, nobody to inherit them. A couple of days later, people in the town, including their downstairs neighbor, Reb Baruch, start to hear laughter, dancing, screaming, howling, screeches coming from this apartment upstairs, and they know nobody moved in. And this goes on night after night after night, not going away. People knocking on the door, no answers coming, just screaming and howling and laughter. And they realize something supernatural is going on inside of this apartment. And they're not sure what to do. Now, Reb Baruch was a student of Rabbi Yoel Baal Shem. So Reb Baruch made the journey to Rabbi Yoel Baal Shem to ask him for some advice. While Reb Baruch is gone, the mayor of the town, a very close friend of the Jewish people, but was not Jewish, he was a Christian, decided he's going to go speak to the bishop to find out about this supernatural occurrence, whatever's going on. He tells the bishop of the issues in town, in this apartment, and the terror that it's causing. The bishop says, I have a solution. And the bishop comes with several priests sprinkling the holy water, chanting different cantations. And as they come into the apartment, the door swings open. And the images that these priests saw left one fainting, left one unconscious, left one going mad and just running wild. He could not handle it. He realized there was a serious issue here. Rabbi Yoel Baal Shem, in the meantime, tells Reb Baruch, he says, let me send 10 of my students with you and I will send them with a plan. These 10 students come holding 5 Torah scrolls. They come into the apartment and they are commanded, walk into the apartment and say, with the power of the Torah, you demons are banned. And they are to set up shop in this apartment, learning Torah day and night, having prayer services there. And they go ahead and they do it. The moment they get there, the door swings open. They come in. As soon as they start to speak, these supernatural spirits and powers are gone. No more noises, no more awful smells. Everything is somewhat back to normal. After several days of peace, quiet, tranquility, people in the town think it's all over. All of a sudden, the noises are back, but this time not from the apartment, but from the cellar. Night after night after night, relentlessly not letting up, with the laughter, the screeching, the noises. Now, there was a particular Jew in town, was a neighbor, had his shop, was neighbor to this apartment building, and he used to sell rugs. This man could not stand Rabbi Yoel Baal Shem when it came to the movement of Kabbalah, for people who studied or was to become Hasidus. He didn't like it. Anyways, he heard rumors that maybe Rabbi Yoel Baal Shem would be coming to solve the problems of these demons. And he didn't like the concept. Anyways, one day he gets a customer in the store who wants a particular rug that happens to be in the cellar. So the shopkeeper sends his son along with the customer down to the cellar to go check out the rug. As soon as they get to the cellar, they touch the door swings open, and the images that they saw were horrific, to the point that the son lost his mind. They had to tie him down to save him from hurting himself or anybody else around him. Townspeople realized it was time for the Baal Shem to come. Rabbi Baal Shem comes to town, and he walks into the apartment with two other great sages, and they were going to convene a Jewish court of law. They sit down and they call the demons, and they say, with the power of the Torah and the power of a Jewish court, we call you to court. And then Rabiel, with a very strong statement, screams out and he says, I command you with the power of the Torah that one of you appears in a non-horrific sight to stand judgment in front of us and to speak clearly. And he says to the demon, what is your claim? The demons claim as follows. We are the product of all of the negativity, all of the waste of human energy of Gittel and Avigdor who lived here. You see, they had no physical children, so we are their inheritors. And you want to take what's rightfully ours. To which he responds, Rabiel responds, you demons have no place here already since the times of the Talmud. You've been banished to corners of the earth where people are not. You have no right to be here. Leave now and never come back. With screeches and windows open, these demons disappear, are never heard from again. But let's just summarize. What do we learn about demons? Are they real? Based on logic, they could be. Based on tradition, they definitely are. Is every story about them true? Definitely not. And we discussed different appearances that they may have. But to tell you the truth, there is nothing to be afraid of. There is nothing to fear. And we will develop this concept much more next week. But before we get to that, we're almost done. Let's get to the part about the angels. More positive. Where do they come from? What do they look like? And who are some well-known angels? So, you see, when it comes to angels is a lot more straightforward. They are a force, a spiritual force. They have no body. There is nothing physical about them. Even to the point where the prophet Yechezkel, the prophet Isaiah, describes different images that they saw when they had the vision of the chariot where they saw angels. And they say there were some with 2 wings and some with 4 wings and some with faces like a lion, faces like an ox, faces like an eagle and like a person, and different structures. These were all different terms of people trying to find words to explain an experience that they couldn't explain, to explain a vision that they couldn't explain. Even as prophets, there was no anthropomorphic descriptions that would actually describe them in a proper way, but they did the best that they could. And that's what these terminologies come from, not that there are any images. Now, there are different levels of angels. When I say levels, means that there are some which are more spiritual and less aware of their own existence and more of aware existence of God. And they go from the highest to the lowest, and that is there are angels known as Chayes, Aifanim, Erelim, Chashmalim, Srafim, Malachim, Elokim, Bnei Elokim, Kruvim, and Ishim. In short, all these names mean angels. But just roughly to translate, Chayes means life, energy, or animals, but more like life or energy. These are the highest level. Eifanim means spheres or galaxies. Erelim, then we have Erelim and Chashmalim. Erelim means got on this one. Lost it in my notes for now. We'll have to get back to it. Chashmalim is like chash and mal, which in modern Hebrew is electricity. Chash means silent. Mal means talking. These are angels that flicker in and out. Sorry, Elim means fireballs or fire. Srafim means those who are consumed. Malachim are those on a mission, messengers. Elokim are judges, Bnei Elokim, junior judges, or children of judges. Kruvim are cherubs, childlike figures. Ishim are people. Those are the ones, the lowest level of angels that interact the most. And like we explained before, the necessity of these angels is to bring godliness and spirituality into breaking it down, similar to your electricity wires, and bringing power from the plant that can transform them to usable electricity that you can handle in your own house. The same thing is with godliness and spirituality that comes through all these levels of angels, as we explained before, according to Maimonides. And the idea is like this. Some of the well-known angels. We have Malach Michael, the one who is known as the angel of kindness. He's the angel that saves. He's the angel that brings goodness into the world. There's Malach Gavriel, the angel of severity, the angel who generally goes to war, and Malach Rifal, the angel of healing. These three angels are probably most famously known in the story with Abraham. When they go to visit Abraham right after his circumcision, Rifal goes there to heal Abraham. Michal goes there to give them good news that they will have a child within a year. And Gavriel goes along to destroy the city of Sidon. Michal is most famously that when Avraham Avinu Abraham was thrown into the fire in Ur Kasdim by King Nimrod, Michal wants to go down and save Avraham. God says, not this time, I'm going to save Avraham. You'll get another opportunity. And he gets an opportunity years later, as is recorded in the book of Daniel. One of the times of Nebuchadnezzar, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah are thrown into the fiery furnace in Babylonia. The angel, Michal, comes down and he saves them from being burnt. Gavriel, whenever the Jewish people go to war, Gavriel goes out to war with us. Malach Rifal, anytime that there is healing that takes place in the world, Malach Rifal is involved. Uriel is the angel of enlightenment. He's known to be more like a lion. He is known as the angel that makes the spheres in the galaxies move. The Satan. If you notice, the Satan was not on the spectrum of demons, but actually an angel. You see, angels have absolutely no free choice, at least for the most part. Angels do as they are commanded, do as they are told, they fulfill the missions that they are sent on. They are perfect in the way that they act. They are perfect in fulfilling the missions they are sent on. See, the Satan has a very bad rep. People think, oh, the Satan is bad. You see, the Satan is just the DA. He's the prosecutor. He has to make sure that the system of justice is working. Nobody likes the DA, and it's like everybody in prison says, I'm innocent. I didn't do anything. It was the DA. But that's what the Satan is. His whole purpose is to prosecute, to make sure, listen, you lived an entire life, you went through an entire year, it's time to make a reckoning. It's time to take you to court, and let's see how you used what God gave you. In addition to that, he's also the tester. He tests us. But his whole entire purpose, as the Talmud tells us, is for the sake of heaven. He doesn't necessarily want us to fail. He wants us to succeed, whatever succeeding means based on the test. But he's not bad. He's not evil. For if he were evil, he wouldn't be an angel and he wouldn't be there. And one of the most famous, Eliyahu Hanavi, was a man turned angel. As we know, Eliyahu Hanavi shows up every night, every year at our Seder. And Eliyahu Hanavi is there present based on different occurrences that happened in his life. Comes to every single Brit Milah, every single circumcision. Now, there's another aspect about angels which is fascinating. Can we create angels? And the answer is yes, we create our own angels. Through our thought, speech, and action, be they positive or negative, we create different types of angels. Every time we do something good, every time we have a good thought, speech, or action, we are creating angels. And the opposite happens with negativity. And the Zohar tells us something fascinating. Every time with every word a person prays, every time a person opens up at the Tehillim, every holy word that comes out of our mouths creates angels. But you see, when we do it with fervor and excitement, it creates energetic angels. When we do it, that this is a burden, I really would rather be doing something else, this is meaningless to me, we create lethargic angels. Which angels would you like to create? Now, that's it for tonight in regards to the information I have for you. Next week's class, we'll be discussing, is magic real and is it kosher? Based on everything we had, tonight was really a framework to really understand and be able to appreciate next week's class about magic. Then we will be able to understand what the ultimate purpose of angels and demons and their relevance to us and their interactions with us. And the burning questions, are demons still around? And can I sell my soul to a demon? Thank you for joining us tonight. If there are any questions, feel free to